All right. Roll call. Introductions and roll call. We're gonna start down.
Sure. Aaron Dawson with Federal Highway, Michigan Division. I'm the new assigned planner for the MACC area. So any questions about federal requirements, please let me know. I'll be happy to help.
I got a ton of them. No. I'm the other Tyler Kent. I'm out of the MDOT Grand Region office.
Tom Bird, Ottawa Road Commission.
Brett Nykamp, Zoom Township.
Terry Neenhuis, Howland Township.
Skip Keeter, Park Township. Hannes Myers of the MAC.
Judy Fisher of the MACC.
David Van Gedoven with the MAC. Just my one friend here at the table, I guess.
I know.
Jim Snorri, Allegan County Board of Commissioners.
Howard Bauman, Port Sheldon Township.
Ken DeWeer, Fillmore Township.
Russ Tislau with the MACC Authority Board.
Kevin Kleinstra, City of Zeeland.
Chris Brown, Director of Finance, MACC.
Doug Bradeville, from the auditor for the MAC.
Staff, please.
Rob Banks with the MACC.
Carolyn Alstead with the MAC. Mara Garrity with the MAC. Kelly Gowers with the MAC.
Thank you very much.
Don Mail with MDOT.
Thank you, Don. All right, I don't see any public for comments, so we're gonna move right into the presentation of the audit report, which is Doug Fredeveld. Oh, I'm sorry, thank you. I guess we do need approval for the minutes, so sorry about that.
Supported.
Okay. Any questions, comments? All's in favor, say aye. Aye. Thank you very much. All right, Doug, thank you for being here.
Appreciate being here again. Are we good? All right. He's got me on a little bit of a leash, so I won't wander around too much. First, I think they handed out the audit reports. They're hot off the press, but page 1 is the important page to everybody, I'm sure. It reports all of your financial information, but page 1 is our opinion on the financial statements. After we come and do an audit, we look through a lot of information to form an opinion, and it says the financial statements present fairly in all material respects the financial position of the MACC. So that's a good, clean opinion, certainly what you hope for when you have an audit done. Then the next section is management discussion and analysis. If you don't look at any of the numbers, look at the top of page 3 where the highlights are, and that just tells you what the MACC has done over the year. Management puts this together for us. We don't do this part of the statement. And then I'll just run through a few slides with some information about some of the things going on in the statements themselves. So the first slide here just shows the net position of the overall MACC. All of the MACC has a couple of different funds, including the MACC holding. So you can see the top line there is your unrestricted net position. Net position continues to increase year after year, so that's good. And then the blue line is your amount that's invested in capital. That decreases as it's depreciated. It'll increase if you purchase new capital. So it's been depreciating over the last several years. It's primarily the building, which is owned by MACC Holdings. So that's primarily what that is. And then just a look at the two different divisions, transportation and watershed. You can see that the revenues exceed expenses in the transportation fund. In watershed, the expenses exceed the revenues. So that's a net loss in the watershed. And we'll get a little bit more about that in a minute. This is your overall, where do the revenues come from? So grants, you can see they're almost dead even with last year. The grant source is switched up a little bit, and we'll see that on the next slide. But then the watershed dues, transportation dues, you can see they're very, very much similar to previous years and have not changed much over the last 5 years, so just a 5-year trend. And then this is your revenues. See, transportation grants from 20 to 18 went down. Watershed grants from 2018 to 2019 went down, but they were partly offset by other local grants for some other locally funded type projects. That's why grants are overall even with last year. So, but the sources of the grants changed somewhat. Then this is the fund balances of the individual funds, the transportation and watershed. And what I'm attempting to show on this slide, this is a new one this year. You can see transportation has continued to increase year after year. Watershed, and if you look at page 12 of your report, you can probably see this a little bit better. But watershed, from 2015 to 2019, decreased down to 0. And for the last 3 years has been at 0 fund balance. And that red line there is the amount that was supplemented or transferred over to watershed by the transportation fund to keep them whole, to keep them at 0. If we didn't transfer money over, they would be showing a deficit, which the state would not appreciate, and you would have to reply to them. But for the last 3 years, it's run deficits of $800, then $75,000, then $70,000. And the intent has been all along that the watershed fund will pay back the transportation fund. So that's going to have to be looked at in this coming year to start making that happen. And that's all the financial information. As you page through the report, if you have other questions, I'd be more than happy to answer any of those. We also have a 2-page little letter that was handed out, this one. And that has a few management letter comments on it, as we call them. On the second page, about near the bottom of the page, we've got 3 comments there, 3 bullet points. Yeah, credit card purchases review. Right now, the policy is that the executive director reviews all the credit card purchases, but that leaves him reviewing his own. So the practice has been that another staff person is looking at all of the credit card purchases, which is fine, but it doesn't follow the policy. So we're suggesting maybe the policy be looked at and adjusted. I think that the procedures and the controls are good. It just doesn't follow policy. So fix the policy is what we're saying. And then item number 2 there is regarding the watershed program that we just discussed on this slide. That's what that's referring to. And then item number 3, budgeting. If you look back at page 26, the very last page of the report, you can see that the budget is set. This is the watershed budget. And the budget is set to run a deficit. That's not allowed by state law. So you can't do that. It has to come down to 0 on the bottom line. And right now, the amended budget for 2019 was a negative fund balance of $20,000. So I just wanted to point out that you shouldn't be adopting budgets that have deficits at the end. That's my report. Are there any other questions I can answer? I'd be happy to. Nope.
Doug, thank you very much. I want to say thank you and also compliment Chris Brown, who is instrumental in the finances of the MACC and has been doing it for a long time. We have looked at the 3 items. Judy is actually working on a credit card policy currently, using some of what Chris has given us, so we are working on that. Chris and I have had discussions about the watershed program, and we will get that corrected. I think what's important to note, and I had talked to Doug about it, is that the funds that have been transferred to the watershed is a loan. It is expected that will be paid back. I think Mr. Berkman was working on a path as we work with ODC and Project Clarity, so that work will continue. It'll just continue with a different director, but we certainly recognize that is something we have to work on, and I'll comment on that a little bit later. But Chris, thank you for your efforts. Do you have any comments you want to make?
No, he did a great job as well.
I want to ask you one question. One of our members called me this morning and said, what's this transfer between watershed? And I know I asked you, so you kind of know this is coming, but you do a calculation of transfer of watershed to the general fund for indirect expenses, correct?
Right, yeah. What we do throughout the year is that anything that's kind of like an indirect cost, whether it be office supplies or, well, generally speaking, or whether it be rent, which we pay to MACC Holding, and other things that, like utilities, that would kind of like be for an overall cost of the organization. We book that throughout the year into the general expense categories. However, part of all those expenses is, part of it's a watershed component, part of it is a general fund transportation component. And then after we run some comparisons throughout at the end of the year, we have a formula set up in a sheet. Then what happens is that we have to allocate the indirect cost to the right department. So that adjustment at the very end is allocating indirect cost to watershed. And then also, of course, the general fund and transportation amounts are correct then. And those and we have to do that because what Doug will be looking at is that we can't say that all of the indirect costs is something that we can bill to MDOT as part of the indirect rate to get reimbursed for. So we have to reduce that overall indirect cost so that we're billing the state of Michigan correctly for MDOT. And if we didn't do that, they would catch it and let us know and ding us. No doubt. It will happen. So that's why.
Chris, thank you for being here. Thank you for your work.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Okay, we need a motion, unless there's questions, we need a motion to accept the audit report. Glenn, Tom, thank you very much. Any further questions? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Gentlemen, take care. All right, we are going to move into environmental programs. And Kelly will be taking this, so Kelly, thank you.
All right, so the first thing I wanted to just briefly review today is our TMDL annual report. So for the phosphorus total maximum daily load that's on Lake Macatawa, every fiscal year we have to provide a report to the state on the progress toward meeting that TMDL goal. And so this is part of we have a voluntary agreement that we signed with the state, and that's one of the components of that agreement is that we put this report together. I will note that the current agreement that we have expires in 2020, so we are working with the state right now, with Eagle, on kind of revising that agreement. We're kind of very early in that. It doesn't expire, I think, until July. So at some point we'll have a draft. I would like to wait until the new director starts to review that with him first. So then perhaps in April we'll bring a draft to this board to review before we bring it back to Eagle for kind of further comment and revision. So just as a reminder, our goals are to reduce the annual phosphorus loading into the lake to 55,000 pounds per year and reach an in-lake concentration of 50 parts per billion. It's really difficult to measure 55,000 pounds per year, or to measure that input. It's a lot easier to measure the in-lake concentration. So really that in-lake concentration is what we're looking for. The loading of that 55,000 pounds per year is split between point sources and non-point sources of phosphorus. So point sources being the direct dischargers, so the wastewater treatment plants in Zeeland and Holland, and Meade Johnson are our three largest contributors. So we do, they monitor those under their NPDES permits, and then they provide numbers that we include in our report. And then the work that we do with the grants and working with farmers and doing stormwater management, that's where the non-point source reductions come from. The point sources are very easy to measure. The non-point source is not as easy. So we do a lot of that through modeling to really estimate what kind of an impact we're having, and then hoping that in-lake concentration is really going to show where the progress is being made. So just kind of some highlights from 2019. This is our fiscal year 2019. As far as our non-point source reductions, again, these are modeled. These aren't actual measured reductions. So we estimated just about over 4,000 pounds of phosphorus were reduced in 2019 because of practices that were put in under the GLRI grant that is wrapping up currently, and then other efforts through Project Clarity. And then I also have some previous totals. We've kind of kept a running total, 2012 to 2019. That's as long as I've been doing the reports, so I'm confident in those numbers. So about little over 28,000 pounds per year. Makes a lot of assumptions with that number. It assumes that practices that were done in 2012 are still being done. So that's probably not the case 100% of the time. We hope that it's the case. And then prior to that, we had, from what I could tell from previous reports since the TMDL started in 2000, another 23,000 pounds. So if we're looking at these numbers as far as how many pounds we're trying to get to, we're trying to get to 83,000. So we're making good progress, but we're not to that number yet. But again, we're really looking at that in-lake concentration, which I do have some of that. But here first is kind of a look at the point source dischargers, because again, this is easily measured. They send me reports every year, so we submit this with our the report for our voluntary agreement. So 20,000, that's their limit in the TMDL. So you can see that they're consistently operating well below that. So there really isn't any more work that can be done with the point sources to make reductions. Although with upgrades that have been done recently in both communities, wastewater treatment facilities, there have been some efficiency improvements that have been gained because of those. And then Meade Johnson is a very small portion of that. And then on the kind of that in-lake concentration, this is really what we're looking at. So through the efforts of the Grand Valley State University's Annis Water Resources Institute, through Project Clarity, we've been looking at those numbers with their monitoring. The state also does some monitoring of the lake. This is from 2018. Their 2019 report should be coming out hopefully within the next month or so. So as soon as that report is out, we will share that. But based on the 2018 monitoring, we're still not meeting that 50 parts per billion. And so that was the interim goal set by the TMDL. We really want to be below 25. That's the ideal for a sustainable aquatic system. But you can see with the monitoring and kind of historic, there's a lot of inconsistencies from one year to the next, but the trend is definitely in the right direction. We're heading toward that goal. We're not going away from it. And some of these spikes that we have here, it's because of when the measurements are taken and other environmental factors. If we have a lot of rain, the phosphorus numbers go up. And these numbers here are calculated based on, I think they take 3 samples throughout the summer. So it's a snapshot in time. It doesn't really represent what's happening in the lake today or yesterday, just the time that sample was taken. So it's constantly changing. But again, we're seeing the trends go in the right direction. So I think that's all I have on the report. The full report that we submit to the state is posted on the MACC's website. I'd be happy to send a link if anybody really wants to read the whole thing. It kind of provides more detail on the efforts that were done. But any questions about where we are with the TMDL goal? Yeah.
That annual report that you submit, do they ever respond to that? Do they, to Eagle?
I mean, I just get an acknowledgement that they received it. I've never received any comments back or questions.
You feel good about the report?
Yeah.
Feel like it's progress?
Yeah, absolutely.
Good.
Okay.
All right, and then you have a grant to tell us about.
Yeah, so I think it was at the July meeting we had discussed this grant previously. We had submitted an application to the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative in December, or in July. We were just notified in December that we were a finalist, which means that we received it, pending any administrative issues that they might find. But we've been in contact with them, and there hasn't been any indication that there's anything that would disqualify us from being a finalist. So we're just kind of working through the process right now, but I wanted to just provide a little bit of a review of this since it's been a few months since we looked at this. So we're hoping, to get a contract soon to see what that looks like. I'm anticipating an April 1st start date just because that is a clean fiscal quarter, and the current GLRI grant that we have started on April 1st of the year we received that. So that's probably the timeline we're working within, but we'll see when we get a contract. So this project involves some green infrastructure installations in the city of Holland. So we had some concepts developed a few years ago by Kaiser and Associates to do some rain garden bioswales in the city hall parking lots and at Collin Park. Also some permeable pavement at Collin Park. So those are the projects that we submitted with this grant. plus some curb cut rain gardens that the City of Holland has started to do with road reconstruction projects. They installed 4 this year on 19th Street and have plans to do, or they're willing to do, additional if we can find willing homeowners that will maintain them. So we included funding to help offset the cost to both the city and the homeowner to install those curb cut rain gardens. So that's kind of the majority of the project will actually be doing the on-the-ground installation. We also have proposed to do 2 different rainscaping programs. The Lower Grand River Organization of Watersheds has a rainscaping program where they train citizens on how to evaluate a property and make recommendations for rainscaping items. So things like rain gardens, rain barrels, kind of the simple things that people can do around their house to manage rainwater. And so then they have these kind of a database of volunteers. When a homeowner is interested in, what can I do on my property, they send a volunteer out to do an assessment. So the volunteer is trained on how to do that. They're provided resources, and then they do a basic assessment for the homeowner, give the homeowner resources, for landscape companies or design firms if they want to go forward with implementing a design. So we are hoping to work, or we will be working with the Elgro staff, and they will kind of teach us how to do that program, and then we will bring that here. A second component that they have is that they worked with Grand Rapids Community College and offered a contractor certification, an 8-hour course, where like landscape firms, engineering firms could get a certification on rainscaping. So again, things like rain gardens, rain barrels. And so we've been in contact with the instructors of that course, and they are very excited about bringing it to Holland, and we would work with Hope College to do that. So those are kind of the main components. Some of the other grant details, this is just over $400,000 in the grant, about a little over $19,000 in match. This grant did not require match, which was really great. That makes it really difficult for us in a lot of grant applications coming up with that local match. So a lot of that match dollars will actually be volunteer time, and then some miscellaneous expenses. But the majority of the grant funds, again, will go for that on-the-ground installation, and then the rest will cover some of our staff salary, and then we've got sub-awards to our partners. So the City of Holland for doing the curb cut rain gardens, and then the other partners listed there that will help with that volunteer rainscaping program. So again, that's kind of the review of the details of the grant. We'll keep you posted as things move forward, but we are looking for action today to change the person that has authority to accept the grant. When we did this in July, we designated Tim Berkman as the designated representative to sign and negotiate contracts, and so we're asking today that we redesignate that to David Van Genhoven, so that when we get the contract, we can move forward with that quickly and get it signed and returned.
So the motion would be basically designate me to negotiate and
Right.
finalize the contract.
Yep, as the MACC authorized representative for purposes of negotiating and signing the grant contract.
Before we do that, any further questions for Kelly? Go back one slide, Kelly. What is that, did you put that in there for a reason? Will that be a part of the project?
Oh, this picture?
Yeah.
Well, this is one of the City Hall parking lot islands that would be converted into a rain garden. Yeah, we'll have to, work around the existing infrastructure. But this was a project, the City Hall project especially, that the city was excited about because they want to redo the landscaping anyway. It's kind of been failing, and they want to get those trees out of there. We can incorporate trees back into the design.
So the water from the asphalt parking will basically feed into the rain garden.
Right. And this picture here, it shows there's a little pond here, so hopefully we can alleviate that by putting some cuts in these curbs, basically. So the majority of the work will happen within this island itself. They'll just kind of cut some openings in the curb, and then there'll be some excavation, some modification of the soil structure, probably an under drain, with the goal of getting as much water to infiltrate into the ground as possible, but there would still be an overflow into the existing storm drain system that's already on site.
Thank you, Kelly. So we just need a motion to designate the interim director, basically.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Terry.
Second.
Thank you. Appreciate that. James, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you very much. Thank you, Kelly. Caroline, you've been working on a book?
I've been an author now.
What did you tell us this morning? This has been consuming you 24/7, like you said?
Yes, it has. Yep. But we're starting to come to a close. We can see the light at the end of the tunnel. So the long-range plan, I'll give you a little bit of a timeline as well, but I do have the plan in a printout here that I can leave if you want to flip through. I know sometimes it's nice to have hard copy, and because it is quite lengthy, we did not include the hard copy in the mailing, just the digital version. So if you do want to peruse it, I'll keep it back there at the end of the meeting and you can check it out. So we are kind of rounding down on this. Essentially, probably it will be one more month, and then once that 1 month is up, we'll have a final draft that will go first to our technical committee, which some of you are on, and then once the technical committee reviews it, it will then come to policy for that final vote. So what I did want to do today is I have a presentation on this that goes just chapter by chapter, just showing some of the highlights. Because we have been giving you sort of piecemeal chapters here and there throughout the process. But this is kind of the first time that you're seeing it, sort of what it's going to look like in the very end when everything's kind of in order. So it's kind of a good special view this time. So just to kind of review, so chapter 1, this is a brief chapter. It talks about the MACC, who we are, what an MPO does. So anyone from the public that might not be that familiar with the MACC or transportation and planning in general, they'll kind of get a nice introduction here. This also looks at, what our public and stakeholder involvement is. It's really getting into, what is the long-range plan? What is this whole thing about? Chapter 2 goes into a little bit of a brief history just of the MACC region in general. We even give some historical context, found some historical photos from the museum in Holland. So you'll see, the streetcar on 8th Street, and that kind of gives an example of, what our past has been like to look to the future. Because this plan, does look into that 25-year plus future. What will the world look like? So we wanted to go back in the past a little bit, show the history, but then it also does show a little bit of just what the current transportation sort of looks like. Very brief, here's our road network and some of the things going on, because we'll get later into a whole chapter on current transportation. The third chapter goes into the plan vision, so our vision statement, what we want our community to look like in 25 years. And then it also talks about the FAST Act performance goals. So the FAST Act, before the FAST Act, it was the MAP 21 plan. So FAST Act is really the federal legislation that we need to follow as an MPO. So this starts that conversation about there are federal requirements that we have to follow, and some of those performance goals are listed in there that will follow throughout the whole plan. Chapter 4, this looks at progress since the last plan. So we look at from 15 to 19. So we're picking up just from the last plan. So in the 2040 plan, that stopped at 2013. So now we're looking, 14. So now we're looking 15 to 19. And just taking a synopsis of, which projects have been done in that time. There's a nice budget there that says that we've invested in our region about $95 million over those years into all these different categories. And then chapter 5, it also has 6 different project highlights that are from more recent projects in our area. So we really kind of show, okay, what's a safety project? So we highlighted Zealand's new roundabout in there, a really good aerial photo. So I was happy to use it. But we even show, a rail project and what that looks like. Chapter 5, the existing transportation system. This is a really nice chapter that shows what's on the ground today. We look at our road network, our freight network, some of those even local freight routes that are used a little bit more often by freight providers. We look at the current non-motorized system that we have within our planning region. And this also gets a little bit into the PASER, the pavement quality levels, what's currently happening out there, a little bit on traffic volumes on the major highways, some stats on MACC transit. So going into all the different kinds of transportation we have here in our region, what does it look like today? Chapter 6, we get into regional issues. This chapter starts off by these, talking about corridors of concern. Essentially what that means, they're the corridors that we mostly use. So you can think of our really large streets like maybe Waverly, 16th Street, some of those really heavily traveled roads that we want to keep an eye on. And so throughout that section, we make some suggestions on things to look out for in the future, especially if we have population increasing like we're expecting, things to keep an eye on and possible improvements to make if issues start arising on those corridors. We also look at some trends in transportation, so a little bit could be trends in funding, but again, there's a whole section on financials, so that gets a little bit more in depth with that. But just trends with population growth. We even have a little section there on trends in autonomous vehicles, because 25 years, maybe that will be more of an issue. So we want to put it in there to spark the conversation and start thinking about it for that long view. There's also a section on security and emergency preparedness in here, and we touch on the fact that the MACC, we do have a seat at the table with Ottawa County's emergency preparedness committee. So, if a big emergency were to happen, there's someone on that committee that looks at GIS. We have then access to what transportation projects are going on that day, hopefully, so that if an emergency happens, our region is prepared and has a good idea on how we can move people through our transportation system. Chapter 7 looks at trends and projections. I think this is my favorite chapter. I just think it's very interesting looking at currently where we're at with population, housing, employment, and where we're going. So I think it's always kind of fascinating to see what will the makeup of our region look like in 25 plus years. This also looks at commuter flow patterns from county to county, how long it takes for the average person to get to work every day. Just kind of a fun chapter to read and peruse and see what the future may hold. Chapter 8, travel demand model. This is probably the most technical chapter. I did not write it. This was written by the travel demand modeler from MDOT who works for our region on this. So it's really well written. If you are curious about how travel demand models work, what goes into them, into the model process, how it spits out to the numbers in the end, you can take a look through this chapter. It'll show you all the components, all the data that goes into it, and how they run trend analyses for current look at what our transportation system looks like today, and then what we might see in the future. So this picture here added in is in that chapter. It shows that today we don't have too much congestion, but they're saying maybe in 25 years, based on population growth estimates, maybe Chicago Drive will have a little bit more congestion on it. So this helps us to remind ourselves that, okay, certain areas might feel it in a 20 plus years. And so what do we need to start doing to address those issues today? Chapter 9, the performance measures section. This is a really big new part of federal planning, which then comes down to the state, our performance measures. So even after this today, we're going to be bringing up safety performance measures. That's a new annual performance measure that we have to follow. So while there's multiple federal performance measures that the federal government is interested in, there are a couple that the MACC as an MPO needs to report on that we need to keep track of. So this chapter really gets into those. So the 4 that we really remain focused on are safety, pavement and bridge quality, so that kind of gets into the PASER numbers that we do, where every year we look at pavement quality. System reliability, that's just in here to look at how is our system functioning. System reliability it's a little different than congestion. It's more of like, can you rely on that? Maybe it's congested all the time, so you can rely on it to be congested all the time. But we're really quite fortunate in our area that we don't experience too much of that, and we have a reliable system. And also there's some information on public transit. Chapter 10, future projects. So this is currently a list of all of our road, transit. We have some non-motorized pieces in there. Essentially anything that was in our TIP, the 4-year program, is included, also in the long-range plan. The way it's currently organized, and this is subject to change, we currently have the projects that have funding allocated to them in that main list. Everything else that currently doesn't have funding attached to it into the future, we put in the illustrative list. Now, we might be changing some of that around because there is this idea of reasonably assumed funding. So while something may not technically be budgeted on maybe a county's list, but they're assuming they're going to do the project and there will be money most likely, we can probably move those over to the main list. So that is subject to change. That should get worked out probably this week. So, but everything that you do have currently, the main list and the illustrative, is what we're working with. So you do have access to all the projects that we're thinking about. Stay tuned. The final plan, you'll see how that all works out. Chapter 11, the financial resources analysis. This is a lengthy chapter as well. It goes into all of the different funding sources that we have for transportation. So it listed out based on your federal, state, and local for highways and for transit. So you'll start, if you'll notice the way it's organized, you'll kind of have that federal, state, and local for highway first, and then the next section further down in this chapter will be for transit. This chapter is also really important because we're supposed to prove our fiscal constraint. Essentially, what that means is we should never have more programmed than what is available. I believe that's like a funding available, if that's a good definition of fiscal constraint. Something that we do talk about in the financial chapter, the state is looking to, they're assuming revenues will increase about 2% per year, but project costs will probably increase around 4% per year. So we do talk about the fact that we'll probably use whatever money we're given. We'll definitely use it all because our needs are so great. So since revenues necessarily aren't keeping up with inflation, we will need extra money. We're saying that we do need more funds, as you know, to keep our roads in a state of good repair. Chapter 12 is the plan evaluation. This really looks at, it's kind of the summary of how this plan is meeting those federal goals. So we talk again about the goals, how the plan's meeting it. This chapter also looks at environmental justice. So if you remember from the TIP process last spring, the environmental justice, usually there's maps that show it could be populations with lower income, and then overlaid onto that are our projects and what percentage of those projects are in maybe that lower income area, or maybe it's a region with more ethnic diversity. So we want to show that there are investments in those areas. So the way it currently is, it might change. Again, if we're switching some of those illustrative projects up into the main list, we'll go back and redo the EJ map for this as well. So if that changes, you'll see a little adjustment to EJ as well with new updated numbers. We also talk about air quality in this chapter. So air quality is a big deal for our region because Ottawa historically was a non-attainment area for air quality. It currently is a maintenance area, so we are attaining air quality currently, but Allegan County is still a non-attainment region for ozone. So because of those designations, we do need to have air quality conformity run on all of our projects. And it's kind of like the travel demand model, where it's an online model, an electronic model that they look at and see how many VOCs and things like that and ozone will be created based on what we're doing. So in the appendix, there is an Allegan County document that we received from MDOT for this. Ottawa counties should be coming this week. So we'll be getting that, and that will be an appendix item. And so still to come, as we wrap this up, we will be including an executive summary at the beginning. And then as public involvement and the consultation efforts are still ongoing through the end of this month, those chapters will be added for your final draft review. And just a timeline, so January 16th, next week, is our long-range transportation plan open house at the MACC, so please come by. We'll kind of have a guided tour around our large conference room that you can check out different things. February 10th, as I mentioned before, it will go to the technical committee first, that final draft for their review, and then submittal onto policy on February 24th. And then the next day, I then hope to get it turned around and submitted to MDOT and FHWA. So this was kind of the nice big review of this. So then I figured this is a good month to do it. So then next month, it's easy to just kind of review any updates and then hopefully vote on it. Any questions? All right. Yes. Do you want to say something?
Yeah. For the FAST Act planning factors, does the plan specifically address resiliency and travel and tourism?
Yes. So there are two that were missing, and John Lanham just gave me those comments on Friday. Okay. So I'm going to update that. Yeah, I can never find those online. So. Okay. Yeah.
If you need more information,
thank you.
I'll be
Yeah.
happy
So John gave those to me, John Lanham. Some of you have met John, and so those will be incorporated as well.
Okay, and for consultation, if you're looking for a February 24th adoption, that needs to be sent to at least the federal agencies now.
Yes, yep.
45 days at least
Yep.
for some.
Yeah, it's going out probably tomorrow.
Okay,
So.
great,
Yeah.
good.
I think we're still good on that. Yeah.
Carolyn?
Yes.
Thank you. That's a lot of information to put together. It's a lot to explain. You always do a nice job of making it meaningful. So, nicely done.
Thank you. Okay. 2020 safety performance measures. I'm going to grab something here. So this is now, I think, remind me, is this the second or third year now that this is the third year. Yep. So these are annual targets that get updated. You had some supporting documents that were sent out in the packet that kind of go really nicely into how these performance measures are determined. It's multiple agencies that work on this collaboratively to determine the new targets. And the target is based off of the baseline condition. Baseline condition, it's 5-year rolling average for fatalities, serious injuries. And one of so this document here with this assessing safety performance, this document is really quite nice because it gives you a trend. It has some of the trends for fatalities and what the predictions are. Good news is that 2018 was below what they predicted fatalities to be. So that's always great. And then 2019, they say, is also tracking to be below what fatalities were expected. So that's always great news when more lives are saved. So again, this document, if you want to learn a little bit more about how those performance measures are created, yeah. But otherwise, we are looking to adopt the state targets for safety for the MACC region.
I'll move the adoption of Resolution 20-03.
Any questions?
I do have a couple questions not related to the vote, though. Is that okay? Okay. Does the MACC currently track local data just for the MPO and performance trends?
Yes, so we have a system performance report that was created, which is also an appendix item in our long-range plan. So this does have local data as well as the state data for fatalities, serious injuries relating to motorized and non-motorized users. Is that kind of what you're thinking about? Okay.
Yep. And
Yep.
does the MACC plan on ever setting its own safety targets, local safety targets?
I
Or-
think at the moment, like the rest of the state, I think especially in the beginning, we wanted to do like a wait and see approach to see if anyone else was going to veer
Sure.
from the states. And at this time, no one else has, correct?
No,
Okay.
no.
So I guess we'll have to evaluate that into the future to see if we do want to make more stringent safety targets. And if we do, I think then we would be held. So if we were to change our targets to be stricter, then does that then change our reporting? And therefore, if we don't meet, so what would I guess what would happen if we didn't
Yeah,
meet then
so-
our goals?
Basically, you would set your own local targets
Mhm.
and you would track the data locally
Yep.
to see if you meet your targets or not, based on the safety projects or whatever
Yeah.
performance category that you select. There are no penalties to MPOs under any part of the legislation for meeting or not meeting targets.
Okay.
So, and they're not necessarily stricter, it's just setting targets for your own area,
Okay.
so.
Yeah. I think especially now being a few years in, we could start looking at that as a
Yeah,
possibility.
it's just an option, it's not a requirement, but I think there's a few MPOs that are starting to look at that.
Okay.
And being able to more closely manage your local system performance as opposed to just
Looking at
sticking
the
with the
state
state
level.
data.
Yeah. Which is, and that makes sense because, our region could be is very different necessarily. We're not a large metropolitan area.
Right.
But, so we're a little different. Yeah.
Okay,
Okay,
thanks,
cool.
that's
Yeah,
all I had.
Thanks. I do have 4 copies of our system performance report. It goes into the Pazer data, safety, it does have some transit information. It's very graphic oriented, so it should be easy to read. I'll keep a couple of those copies back there if you would like to take one with you.
Okay, Aaron, thank you. Good questions.
Yeah, and even though, it was just voted on, the motion was to adopt the FY safety performance measures as stated, allowing the targets to be updated in the MACC's 20 to 23 tip, and authorizing the chair to sign the associated resolution.
Correct.
Okay.
And we had a motion and a second, didn't we?
I think,
Okay.
I think that was,
Bird,
Terry
Tom
and,
Bird, and Skip Keeter.
yes.
All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you very much.
May I ask a follow-up? That local safety report, is that available on the website, or will it be?
It is, yes. It is currently a part of the long-range plan, so you can find it in the appendix, but I believe I think it's on one of our pages, but if not, I'll do that today. I'll
Great.
make sure it's on one of our main tabs. Yeah. Okay, tip amendment. This is our first tip amendment of the fiscal year. Just to give you a little bit of an overview of what we've got going on here. The first job that we need to have an amendment for is a railroad project. Nothing has really changed on this project, but we recently switched our type of programming for our region. It was called a GPA, a General Program Account. GPAs can be really helpful, I think, for larger MPOs because usually you use a GPA to combine multiple jobs into sort of one job. But in that there's reasons for wanting to do that, especially if there's funding changes. You're looking at the whole instead of the individual project. But being a little bit smaller, we pretty much never had more than one thing in a GPA. It was quite rare. So they were like their own items anyways. So just to kind of clean up our system, we're moving away from that. It's something it's a piece of JobNet, that online system. So moving away from that, this job, when it was being moved, I believe what happened was that it kind of needed to get a reboot on the job. So I don't believe anything changed, but it did trigger an amendment because some of the phase information was updated. So that's the first one. The second one, it's a region-wide job. So Muskegon, GVMC, and Grand Rapids, they will also be voting on this as well. What happened with this, it's a special pavement marking job. They thought they'd have to remove more of the pavement marking before adding new. Turns out they only had to remove about half of it, so the job is not costing as much. Therefore, the cost adjustment triggered that 25%, so it's an amendment. And then the third one, City of Holland, they are adding extra match to their 16th Street project this spring/summer because they are doing some stuff with water mains. So they have greater local match on here, and I think just from some of the numbers that they got back. So this is also triggering an amendment because the overall total cost is going up more than the 25%. Yes.
And Carolyn, you're looking for a motion to accept that? Okay.
So moved.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Glenn. Doesn't look like there's any questions. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Thank you very much. All right, MDOT report. Tyler?
I can go first. Happy New Year, everyone. One thing to talk about here is we are the region is applying for a freeway operations grant through our department's operations template. A couple of things we're looking at is possibly some weed merge lanes on US 31, kind of around the Holland area. Possibly there might be an off-ramp extension on 196 somewhere. I can't remember all the locations, but primarily it'll be on 31. It's a competitive grant. There's no guarantee that we'll get this, but the purpose of me bringing it up is it may, if we're awarded this grant, it may show up in your guys' tip at some point. So if it just shows up out of the blue, that's why. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is the State Transportation Commission is meeting in July 30th, I believe, this month. That's all I have. Don?
I don't have anything to add today.
Okay. Thank you for being here. We're well represented today by transportation people. That's nice. All right. Administrative issues. Okay. So, it was a journey. We posted the position for replacing Mr. Berkman, and thank you to the committee members, the executive committee, Tom, Kevin, Hannes, Terry, Punkage, Jim, and I was a part of that. We had 38 applicants. We interviewed 4, and we felt pretty good about it, so we made a contingent offer on the same day. That's when the journey started. What I found out subsequent to that is, or after that, is that they wanted to retain him, candidly, so they offered him a new position. I would say there was a factor, but perhaps not a deciding factor in what was going on. What I came to learn is that Tyler is very, very attuned to details, and he wanted to make sure he understood housing. He had wanted very much to make sure when we made the move, he made the move, that he was able to bring his young children with him, which I had to admire. I mean, that certainly is a commendable thing. So the process of moving towards the contract took some time, but I personally believe that we have a really good candidate. This is unusual. When I met with Tim Berkman last summer and he told me he was thinking about a new job, he said, if there's one person I could pick or recommend, this is the person. And I said, well, that's fine. Of course, he would have to earn that. You can't anoint him. It doesn't work that way. But he certainly does fit all the criteria we have in terms of his background in planning, transportation. So I'm pleased, and I would say the March 1st, I wanted to hear from him what was going on. It's longer than I would have anticipated, perhaps not surprising when you look at the Christmas timeline. The reason I feel comfortable with that is because of the people over there who are completely capable of handling day-to-day operations. Believe me, it's nothing I do, it's what they do. And they can certainly carry that forward. So with that, you have the written recommendation, but I would open this to questions you have or comments from any of the members of the committee.
Well, I'll just say this. First of all, I want to thank David. You put in a heck of a lot of extra time on this, chasing this individual around and trying to get this all worked out, and we want to thank you for that. But also just going through the interview process and the fact that we had 37 or 38 total. This gentleman, in my opinion, was head and shoulders over most of them, if not all of them, obviously. So that's just all I have to say.
And I would echo what Terry said, and thanks to David for what he did through this process. But you know, he stood out above the rest, and his interest in farming, which is helpful for Rob, and so that was a plus. And plus all his experience he's had with transportation in Valparaiso. So he, like I said, he stood above the rest.
You know, I'll just make a personal comment, and I'll see if we can get a motion. The MACC itself is a relatively small organization in terms of the total scope of our budgets. But we're really trying to recruit someone who's the caliber of a city manager, a township manager, and that means they have to have certain skills and attributes. I think he brings that to us, and I think he will be a good leader. I've certainly talked to him about we want this to be for a period of time. So that's been clear on the table. So I look forward to his leadership. So. Yes, sir.
This is a question for the Michigan Department of Transportation person, perhaps, and that is, what role does MDOT make in connection with the gas tax debate?
We formally are not allowed to lobby on any type of legislative package or anything of that nature. At this point, I'm not aware of any anything regarding the gas tax. I almost talked about last year, but we do what we can with the money that we have. But at this point, as a representative of the public, we're supposed to remain neutral on that. So.
Okay, I should mention Jake Vanderkolk worked with us from Ottawa County. They were terrific as they were in the past, so just did a nice job of taking care of all the work. With that, I would open the floor for a motion to employ Tyler Kent. Glenn, thank you. Was that Skip? Okay. Any further questions, comments?
Yeah, we need a way to separate out those names. It get a little confusing.
We'll figure that out.
We'll table it for
You'll
later.
help us, right?
Yeah, we'll table it for later.
So March 1 is his definite start date.
Was he recommended by Tim Berkman also? Did they have a connection or what?
They definitely have a connection. They were working in the same area.
Okay,
And they're friends too.
they're friends. Well, I appreciate, just talking to him before, he has a very strong ag background.
He does.
And
He does.
we're happy for that.
He's talked about wanting to get into farming again. Might be hard to do in Ottawa County, but I suppose, I don't know. Maybe. But thank you, Ken. Appreciate that. All right, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. You have the financial report. I'm still trying to make sure I understand how that is put together, and before I leave, I guarantee I will understand it. So, The MACC Executive Committee does not have a report, but the MACC Executive Committee will be meeting with the ODC, David Nitrate and Travis Williams. One of the issues we've touched on in the last year is the relationship between MACC and ODC as it relates to Project Clarity. And the Executive Committee has had some discussion about that. We're going to bring them in and throw it on the table. And Terry's been a part of that discussion for a long time, so I appreciate that. And I think it'll be a good discussion. So, all right, Carolyn, you're back on census.
So, yeah, we met right before the holiday. Our complete count committee, our CCC, complete count committee for the census. We have a really good group of people, so a lot represented around the table from each of your communities. But then the chamber is there along with us, Community Action House, various different organizations to give a really great broad perspective. So at the meeting, we spent some time doing an exercise looking at what we think some of the challenges will be this census season, because the Census Bureau is expecting a possible undercount throughout the country, but also, you know, in our area. And an undercount could mean possibly less funding for us to work with. It could also mean less representation at the federal level too. So we talked about some of the issues like access to technology for the rural areas, because the census this time will be online. Though they did mention that some areas that are known to not have great internet access, they said that some of those areas they will just automatically get a hard copy of the census mailed out to them. But we also talked about, you know, citizenship, legal status, the fears around the census, and how to address that in our region. We also talked about, you know, people might have questions about the accuracy or double counting, you know, worried about, okay, well, if I take it online, but what if someone else in my household also takes it online and we don't talk about that? You know, the census, they'll figure that out and they'll know how to do it. But things that people think about, we talked about. There is a staffing concern, I think, that our region has for the census. So the kind of part-time census workers that will mainly go out and work, especially if there is, you know, an address that doesn't respond. You know, usually they knock on the door, say, hey, remember the census is here. The positions are quite well paid. I think it was around the $18 to $20 an hour. So if, you know, you could even post that if you'd like to your regions, if, you know, anyone's looking for some part-time work around the census. And the next step really is we're going to be producing some materials very similar to what Grand Rapids has created, so that we have a really, you know, a simple message that's uniform and unique, so if people see it over and over again, it'll be recognizable. So we'll become doing what Grand Rapids did, very similar. And we're going to be kind of creating a database of outreach materials. The census already has a really great database where, depending on what is your target audience, there's a poster for it or something, so, or a flyer. So the next step is that we're probably going to put all that into one place and then just try to disseminate that material out into the community as much as possible. And we're even talking about maybe doing and getting some yard signs printed. So around the time of the census, maybe have those put out in places like public libraries where people can take the census, or in public spaces where people are going to see them more often. So, yeah.
What do they say each person represents, dollar value?
I think it's $18,000.
Over 10 years?
Over 10 years?
Yeah.
I have to look that up again. I know that's that one
I think that's correct.
big number, but I think it's 18 now. Yeah, I think it's 15. I want to say it was like 15,000 10 years ago. Maybe it's 18,000 now. That's the number I'm thinking of, at least, but you have to double check.
Thank you, Carolyn. Terry, thank you for hosting us.
Well, Welcome to sunny Holland Charter Township. This is pretty much every day, right, Russ?
Sure.
Yeah.
The sun is out there somewhere.
Well, what I'll do is just give you a quick review of the 2019, seeing that we're at the start of a new year, and we'll start out with some economic activity here in Holland Township. A total of 599 building permits were issued in 2019 for an estimated construction value of $90.8 million as compared to 88.7 in 2018. About 50% of that was residential and about 22% it was industrial. Along those same lines, industrial facilities under Act 198, we granted a number of industrial facility exemption certificates for a total value of $10,344,000, which again indicates that there's a lot of economic activity to our benefit going on. Some of the major capital infrastructure projects, some road resurfacing and improvements as contracted by the Ottawa County Road Commission. About 5.9 miles of local and subdivision roads were either repaved or improved. And this is funded from our general fund and our capital improvements fund. We replaced a water main on Lakewood Boulevard, which many of us are aware of as far as the traffic problems there, but replaced an existing 16-inch water main at the cost of about $1.4 million. We installed a sewer force main on Division Avenue, which was about 1.7 miles of 20-inch force main and 0.3 miles of 12-inch water main. Also, we spent a lot of time was dedicated, not necessarily by us, but mostly by Steve and some of our staff on our new public safety building, which, as we speak, we're getting very near to occupying that building. There's a few things to be worked out. It's a approximately 24,500 square feet facility to house the fire department, and also an actual full-blown station for Ottawa County Sheriff. Before, they've always occupied our station number 2, but never had a full-time individual there, and going forward they will have, and it's a much larger space for them and a much nicer space, quite frankly. So we're pretty excited about that. The building is scheduled to be placed in service in about a week and a half, depending on a couple of things that have to be ironed out, and we're going to have a dedication this spring, late spring or early summer, depending on how the weather goes. But that's taken a lot of activity, and there's a lot going on there even as we speak today. Also, we're going through our master plan update, which is a very complex and well thought out process, but it's something that we do every so often, and that's nearing completion, but it's looking good, and we're pretty happy about it so far. That's about it. Thank you.
That's
Thanks
a lot.
for coming.
That's a lot.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it is a lot.
You're gonna meet there next time at the new place?
Well, you know, a year from now we should be able to. Yeah.
Nice. This station will stay in operation?
Yeah, Station 2 is the one on James Street, and we practically, it hasn't closed yet, but we were fortunate enough to have a buyer come along and offer us an awfully good offer on it, and so that's proceeding too as well.
Okay. Any other member comments? Okay.
David, I just wanted to add on to Mr. Meyer's comment here real quick, just because I had a second to think about it. In your reference to NDOT's opinion on any type of transportation funding. Even though we can't advocate for anything, we do provide that information out to folks as well. And we also, by state law, also regulate how the money is distributed as well. But that's all guided by state law. So I just wanted to add that information. Yep.
All right. We will be meeting next February 24th in beautiful Zeeland Charter Township. So we look forward to that. Paul Sachs is scheduled to present to us. He is the Ottawa County Planning Director and is always a wealth of knowledge. So we look forward to that. Did I miss anything, Judy?
No. You're good.
We are adjourned.